How to color wood red. So let's see what I did in this video. Took a 150 grit sandpaper, and I do want to mention that this is just one variation of red, and this is also an extension of the hot pink stain dye, that color that I ended up doing in a previous video, except this is going to be the same board that I ended up using with the hot pink. That one side is sanded with the 150 grit, whereas the other one was sanded with the 220 grit. I take some reverse osmosis water or purified water, and I add 2 tablespoons of the purified water, which comes to about 1 ounce. So it's going to be 1 ounce of purified water. I'm working with the Keda Dye 5-color kit where it has the 5 colors. In this video, I'm going to be working with 2 of those colors, the red dye and the yellow dye. I take a 1/4 teaspoon of the Keda red dye, which comes up to about 0.83 grams of the red. And the yellow is not going to register on the scale, but I do pour it into a 1/8 teaspoon so that way people can end up seeing. But it's about a half of a pea size of the yellow, the Keda yellow dye. And yes, as I mentioned before, that it's just one variation of the red that you can make with this kit. So here I check the red stain color. I end up adding 3 ounces of the rubbing alcohol, where you could end up using just all water if you wanted to. The reason I work with the rubbing alcohol is because it evaporates faster, it dries faster, it has a little bit of better penetrating power on harder, more dense woods. And I am working with a maple that has a figuring in it. Here I think I was just showing what the red dye looked like in the jar. I don't think I was showing what was written on the top or anything, but I was just trying to show the color. So I'm working with a cotton cloth. I think it's just like an old white t-shirt, which is made of cotton. I saturate the cloth out pretty good. I'm not pulling the red dye onto the surface of the wood because it was sanded with a 150 grit, so I just saturate the cloth pretty well. And because it is such a heavily concentrated red dye or red stain coloring, that I didn't need to pull it on there. It was just going to absorb very well. So here I'm showing the differences between the sanding process. So this side being the 150 grit, you can see it's a nice deep red, and this side being, I know it says 320, but it really was a 220 grit sand. You can end up checking the hot pink video out in a previous video that I ended up doing prior to this one if you're interested, because the hot pink does make a cameo in this red dye, red stain video a couple times. Now you don't need to do this section or this portion process, however you want to word it, of this video. I did it because it is such a heavily concentrated red dye color that I just wanted to lift off some of the excess remaining red dye off of the surface of the wood, just to give it a more transparent look. If you didn't do this, it would end up having a more saturated, even more red color to it. Now if you look between the Keda Dye packaging and the yellow container, there is a red piece of pine there. That is the same formula on pine, which would end up having a very similar color, except it would just be on the pine. So now I go forward and I take a soft, clean toweling, and it's just a dry toweling just to help it dry a little bit faster, and then do the burnishing process to help the dyes have a nice shimmer and sheen. My mother ended up getting me this sealer, which I believe is more of a pottery sealer. I think that may be the intention for it. It says that it's triple thick, and I do believe that. If you're going to work with this, I do recommend holding the cam back a little bit further than I do. I only hold it back about maybe 4 to 6 inches, where you should probably be holding it more like 8 to 12 inches because it is such a thick wood sealer. But I am just trying to do a color try to show a color representation of the red dye. So I hope you can kind of bear with me. I end up using the Bear Fur and 1000 grit sandpaper. So if I really wanted to remove the orange peel effect, I should have went with like a 220 to a 300 or 320 to maybe even a 400 grit sandpaper. But again, I'm just trying to show the color representation. So I hope you can kind of look past that. Again, I'm just taking on that clean, dry, soft towel, and I'm wiping off any of the sanding debris that was left over. I'm trying to wipe off both sides. Again, here's the Krylon, and I believe that I end up taking that piece and I give it one good wipe down again, just because I don't want any debris. So yeah, right. So here I end up just doing another good wipe down. Because there's going to be some overspray, and sometimes I end up having some sawdust, or in this case there was some lint from the toweling on the backside because I had cut a rag before. And it's something that you want to do. Just keep the board clean when you're going to be doing your sealing process. And if it's a double-sided board, make sure that you always check the backside as well, because if you do get some overspray, that you could end up sealing some of that debris in the wood sealer itself, and you just made more work for yourself. So it's just much easier to end up flipping the board over, giving it a good cleaning, a good wipe down with a clean lint-free toweling or something, and just making sure that it's clean. So hopefully that's something that somebody can take away from this. Here I'm just checking to make sure that the wood was all wet out nice, that the sealer got all over the entire piece, and that there's no misruns, any defects or anything like that, no runs or mishaps. That tends to happen sometimes, some fuzz or anything that can get into the sealer, a bug. So this is sat now for maybe about 20-30 seconds. I'm just double checking it again, because sometimes if you don't actually wear gloves when you're doing your between coat sanding, you can get your finger oils on the sanded sealer. So I just wanted to make sure that there was no fish eyes or misruns or any defects that was in the sealing process. And if there was, I would have probably tried to touch it up, maybe with a spot touch with the sealer, depending how bad it was. If it was really bad, there's not much I could do other than just to let it end up drying out, fully curing, and then, well, not fully curing, but drying out, and then doing another between coat sanding. And I would have probably went with a heavier grit, like a 220 or so. Here I'm just trying to show off what the color looks like in in my my first person view, not through the camera lens, but in person, what it looks like compared to the camera, and as I'm seeing it through my editor, it looks pretty similar. The representation looks pretty good here. There's sometimes the light can end up reflecting, and I'm working with 5K lighting, so I'm trying to keep it as neutral as possible, but every once in a while the light reflects a certain way that ends up having certain lights. But I'd say in person it is pretty similar to the color representation that you're seeing. I'm going to say that it's a little bit truer red, and it's a little brighter red dye in my opinion, based off of my personal view versus what I'm looking at through on my monitor. The Krylon, that glaze sealer does have a good clarity to it. I think it has a very slight yellowing after it dries out, so I don't think it's too bad though. I think that the color representation was pretty spot on. Here again, that's the hot pink. So I guess one of the things that I really wanted to get across in this video is the different colors that you can get just from sealing the wood. So it doesn't always have to be to add more or less dye or more or less water. Yeah, back to the red dye. But that the wood prep itself or the sanding can also have an effect. So it's just another way that you can end up playing with the dyes and the coloring. And again, here I'm trying to show that that's the 150 grit sanded, and the other reverse side was with the 320. So, hopefully it's another tip that can end up, if you're looking to get in other colors, that there's other ways that you can end up playing around with the dye kit as well. So thank you guys for watching. I really do appreciate it, and I hope it helps somebody out. Thank you so much.